Good evening, everyone. Happy Memorial Day. I hope you had a good federal holiday. I know I certainly did. Got quite a bit of blog writing done, as well as got to hang out with my boyfriend. Yeah, we just walked around the mall trying to find stuff for upcoming vacation, but all I found was a hat. Neither of us like shopping that much, so probably gonna try Goodwill's later on this week. But that is not why we are here today. So, you guys, I put up another poll, you guys voted, and today we are finally going to... There we go. I thought I turned down the volume on that. Anyway, today we are going to cover the late great Joe Kubert. I'm really hoping I pronounced that correctly this time. Now, if you have never heard of the name Kubert while in the comic book sphere, does have me a little bit questioning what kind of comics you are reading, because first off, he has a whole ass name, or a whole ass school named after him. So yeah, the Kubrick School of Cartooning. He's also in the, I believe, the Will Eisner Hall of Fame, and he has done a bunch of work with early comics like Tarzan, Sergeant Rock. He's very well known for all of that. So, we are going to, today, go over his life, his works, and see if we can get a couple of interviews in by him. Okay, so, we're going to start with the Wikipedia page. Get some general information. Alright, Joseph Kubert, born September 18th, 1926, and passed away on August 12th, 2012, was a Polish-born American comic book artist, art teacher, and founder of the Kubert School. He's best known for his work on the DC Comics characters Sergeant Rock and Hawkman. Yeah, I've seen a lot of his Hawkman work. He's also known for working on his own creations, such as Tor, son of Sinbad, and the Viking Prince, and, with writer Robert Moore, the comic strip Tales of the Green Beret. So it looks like another war comic. Vietnam setting. Okay. Two of Kubert's sons, Andy Kubert and Adam Kubert, themselves became recognized comic book artists, as did Andy's daughter, Emma Kubert. And many of Kubert's former students, including Stephen R. Bissett, Amanda Connor, Rick Velch, Eric Shanower, Steve Lieber, and Scott Collins. Kubert's other granddaughter, Katie Kubert, became an editor for both DC and Marvel Comics. Impressive. Kubert was inducted into the Harvey Awards Jack Kirby Hall of Fame in 1997 and the Will Eisner Comic Book Hall of Fame in 1998. Alright, or died. Notable works: Facts of Sarajevo, Sergeant Rock, Hawkman, Punisher Warzone, and Tarzan. I got a video on Tarzan that we're going to look at a little later. Looks like... Oh, his wife's name was Muriel? Aww. Kubert was born September 18th, 1926 to a Jewish family. How many people in the comic industry back then were Jewish? I'm not saying that as a bad thing, but it's kind of bonkers just how many of them were Jewish. Okay, anyway, moving on. In the southeast of Poland. I am not even going to attempt to pronounce that town name. He was the son of Etta and Jack Kubert. He immigrated to Brooklyn, New York City, United States, at age 2 months with his parents and his 2.5-year-old sister, Ida. Raised in the East New York neighborhood, the son of a kosher butcher, Kubert started drawing at an early age, encouraged by his parents. In his introduction to his graphic novel Yosel, Kubert wrote, "I got my first paying job as a cartoonist for comic books when I was 11 and a half. Damn, that is an early start. Or 12 years old, $5 a page. In 1938, that was a lot of money. I've just finished reading a segment of the Will Eisner biography, and they were talking about how they were trying to get at least $7 per page. But yeah, $5 per page, not bad. Another source, utilizing quotes from Kubert, says in 1938, a school friend who was related to Louis Skilberleck, principal of MLJ Studios, future Archie Comics, urged Kubert to visit the company where he began an unofficial apprenticeship at the age of 12, was allowed to ink, stop it, a rush job, and pencils of Bob Montana's teen humor feature Archie. Oh, he inked for Archie. Nice. Alright. Author David Hadou, who interviewed Kubert and other comic professionals for a 2008 book, reported, however, that Kubert has told varying versions of the story of his introduction to comics business at the age of 10, sometimes setting it at the comic shop run by Harry H. Chesler, sometimes at MLJ. However, MLJ did not start operations until 1939, when Kubert was 13. So, that could possibly just be due to old age. Kubert attended Manhattan's High School of Art and Music. During this time, he and classmate Norman Maurer, oh, that's my Nana's maiden name, a future collaborator, would sometimes skip school in order to see publishers. Kubert began honing his craft at the Chesler Studio, one of the comic book packagers that had sprung up in the medium's early days to supply outsourced comics to publishers. And what has Norman Maurer done? Artist and writer, director and producer of films, best known for his long time, professional and personal association with the Three Stooges. Okay. Okay, early career. Kubert's first known professional job was penciling and inking the 6-page story Blackout, starring the character Volton, in Hulky Publishing's Catman Comics number 8, March of 1942, also listed as Volume 2, number 13. He would continue drawing the feature for the next 3 issues, and was soon doing similar work for Fox Comics' Blue Beetle. Branching into additional art skills, he began coloring the Quality Comics reprints for future industry legends Will Eisner's The Spirit, a 7-page comic feature that originally ran as part of a newspaper Sunday supplement. In 1940s, 1950s, Kubert's first work for DC Comics, where he would spend much of his career and produce some of his most notable work. Through the decades, Kubert's art would appear in comics from Fiction House, Avon, and Harvey Comics. But he worked primarily for All American and DC. Kubert's long association with the Hawkman character began with the story A Hot Time in the Old Town in the Big All American comic book in 1944. Kubert drew several Hawkman stories in that title, as well as in All-Star Comics. He and Erwin Hassan drew the debut of the Injustice Society in All-Star Comics number 37, October of 1947, in a tale written by Robert Kanider. Kubert team created the Thorn in Flash Comics, number 89. In the 1950s, he became managing editor of St. John Publications, where he, his old classmate Norman Maurer, and Norman's brother Leonard Maurer produced the first 3D comic books. Interesting. Starting with 3 Dimensions Comics number 1, September 1953, oversized format, October 1953, standard size reprint, featuring Mighty Mouse. According to Kubert, it sold a remarkable 1.2 million copies at 25 cents a piece at a time when comics cost a dime. I mean, considering that it's in 3D, that should justify the cost a little bit more. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry. At St. John, writer Norman Maurer and artist Kubert created the enduring character Tor, a prehistoric human protagonist who debuted in the comic 1 million years ago, September 1953. Tor immediately went on to star in 3D Comics number 2 and 3, followed by a titular, traditionally 2D comic book series written and drawn by Joe Kubert that premiered with issue 3. The character has since appeared in series from Eclipse Comics, Marvel Comics, Epic Imprint, and DC Comics through at least the 1990s. Kubert in the late 1950s unsuccessfully attempted to sell Tor as a newspaper comic strip. The Tor samples consisted of 12 daily strips reprinted in 6 pages in Alter Ego Volume 3, number 10, and later expanded into 16 pages in DC Comics Tor number 1. He contributed work to Avon periodicals, where he did science fiction stories for Strange Worlds and other titles. For EC Comics, Kubert drew a few stories for Harvey Kurtzman's Two-Fisted Tales alongside EC stalwarts Wally Wood, Jack Davis, and John Severin. Alright, DC Comics and Sergeant Rock. Beginning with Our Army at War number 32. Oh, I have Our Army at War number 81. It's a reprint, it's not the actual one. Kubert began to freelance again for DC Comics in addition to Lev Glesson Publications and Atlas Comics, the 1950s iteration of Marvel Comics. By the end of the year, he was drawing for DC exclusively. DC editor Julius Schwartz assigned Kubert, John Schneider, and Carmine Infantio to the company's first attempt at reviving superheroes, an updated version of The Flash that would appear in Showcase number 4, October 1956. The eventual success of the new science fiction-oriented Flash heralded the wholesale return of superheroes and the beginning of what fans and historians call the Silver Age of comic books. In the coming years, Kubert would work on such characters as the medieval adventurer, the Viking Prince, and features starring Sergeant Rock and the Haunted Tank in the war comic GI Combat. He and writer Gardner Fox created a new version of Hawkman in The Brave and the Bold number 34, with the character receiving his own title 3 years later. Kubert's work on Hawkman and Sergeant Rock would become known as his signature efforts. Kubert's main collaborator on the war comics was writer-editor Kanair. I'm never going to get that name right. Their work together on Sergeant Rock is considered a memorable contribution to the comics medium. They introduced Enemy Ace in Our Army at War number 151. In 1965 through 1967, he collaborated with author Robin Moore on the syndicated daily comic strip Tales of the Green Beret for the Chicago Tribune. Kubert served as DC's director of publications from 1967 to 1976. He made The Unknown Soldier the lead feature of Star-Spangled War comics with issue number 151, June through July 1970, and initiated titles based on such Edgar Rice Burroughs properties as Tarzan and Korak. Comics historians Lee Daniels noticed that Kubert's scripts and artwork ranked among the most authentic and effective ever seen. DC Comics writer and exclusive Paul Levitz stated in 2010 that Joe Kubert produced an adaptation that Burroughs aficionados could respect. Kubert edited a number of comic books for DC, including taking over as editor for Sergeant Rock and other military titles, editing Tarzan and other books based on Burroughs' characters. While performing supervisory supervisory duties, he continued to draw for some books, notably Tarzan from 1972 to 1975, and drew covers and layouts for Rima the Jungle Girl from 1974 to 1975. He edited limited collector's edition number C through 36, which features stories from the Book of Genesis adapted by writer Sheldon Mayer and artist Nestor Ronaldo. Kubert and Kanier created Ragman with the first issue, August through September 1976, of that character's short-lived ongoing series. Short-lived ongoing series. That sounds like an oxymoron. Alright. The Kubert School. This is probably the thing that you guys are most familiar with. The Joe Kubert School of Cartoon and Graphic Art was founded in September of 1976 by Kubert and his wife Muriel in Dover, New Jersey's Old Baker Mansion on 45 Lane Street. Then, from 1984, in the former Dover High School, whose tall windows offered optimal lighting. Its first graduation class of 1978 included Stephen R. Bissett, Thomas Yates, and Rick Vetch. Kubert taught a number of students who later became notable professionals, including Amanda O'Connor, Eric Schanauer, Steve Lieber, and Scott Collins. In addition to the Kubert School, in the late 90s, Kubert was offering Joe Kubert's World of Cartooning correspondence courses to prospective students. And here's something cool about the Kubert School. Give it a minute. There are several. The Kubert School has a YouTube channel, and they have several videos about the art of making comic strips. So if you ever want a free resource to check out, go check out the Kubert School for art. And I don't know, maybe you'll learn something new from there. What was that? ISOM? Nope, that is not ISOM. Okay, anyways, beer break. Alright. Later career. Kubert provided art for several anniversary issues of key DC titles. He and writer Paul Levitz created a Hawkman story in Detective Comics number 500, March of 1981. Kubert was one of the artists on the double-sized Justice League of America number 200, March 1982, as well as Batman number 400, October 1986. He wrote and drew a collection of faith-based comic strips beginning in the late 1980s for Sivos Hashman, the Lubavitch Children's Organization, and Moshek Times magazine. The stories, The Adventures of Yaakov and Isaac, were based on biblical references but were not Bible stories. I mean, they sound more like possibly Torah stories, but I don't know. Kubert made a return to writing and drawing in 1991 with the Abraham Stone graphic novel Country Mouse, City Rat for Malibu Comics, Platinum Editions. He returned to the character for two more stories, Radix Morlum and The Revolution, published by Epic Comics in 1995. Also, for Epic Comics, he delivered the 4-issue Tor miniseries in 1993. Oh, I think I used to own that. Yeah, I think I used to own that, or my friend used to own that. Facts from Suranjavo, initially released as a 207-page hardcover book in 1996, and 2 years later as a 224-page trade paperback, was published by Dark Horse Comics. The nonfiction book originated as a series of faxes from European comics agent Irvin Rostemagic during the Serbian siege of Sarajevo. Rostemagic and his family, whose home and possessions in Serbian Dobrinja was destroyed, spent 2.5 years in a ruined building, communicating with the outside world via fax when they could. Friend and client Kubert was one recipient. Collaborating long distance, they collected Rostomagic's account of the life during the wartime, with Kubert and editor Bob Cooper during the raw faxes into a somber comic tale. All right. Kubert drew the first issue of Stan Lee's Just Imagine limited series in 2001 and 2 pencil-illustrated graphic novels, Yosel in April 1943, 2003, and Jew Gangster for iBooks. In 2003, Kubert returned to Sergeant Rock character, illustrating Sergeant Rock Between Hell and a Hard Place, a hardcover graphic novel written by Brian Azzarello. Kubert drew Tex, the Loathsome Rider, written by Claudio Nizzi and published by Saf Comics in 2005, and then wrote and drew Sergeant Rock The Prophecy, a 6-issue miniseries in 2006. In the mid-2000s, he was the artist for PS, the Preventative Maintenance Monthly, a United States Army magazine with comic book elements that stresses the importance of preventative maintenance of vehicles, arms, and other ordnance. In 2008, Kubert returned to his Tor character with a 6-issue limited series published by DC Comics entitled Tor: A Prehistoric Odyssey. In 2009, Kubert contributed a new Sergeant Rock story for Wednesday Comics, published by DC. His son Adam wrote the story, his first foray at scripting. In 2011, Joe Kubert wrote the instruction and drew the lenticular 3D front cover for Craig Yo's Amazing 3D Comics. Kubert inked his son Andy's pencils on the first 2 issues of DC Universe Legacies, a 10-issue series chronologing the history of the DC Universe, and the Before Watchmen Night Owl limited series. The first 2 issues of Before Watchmen Night Owl were released before Kubert's death. The other 2 were released posthumously. In 2012, Kubert and Joe Kubert School produced a syndicated comic strip, Hans Brinker and the Silver Skates, reprinted in Comics Revenue. DC Comics published Joe Kubert Presents, December 2012 to May 2013, edited by Kubert and featuring stories by Kubert, Hawkman, Spit, and the Redeemer. Sen Glasman, USS Stevens, and Brian Boniak, Angel and the Ape. Okay. Kubert married Muriel Falgenson on July 8th, 1951. In the early 1960s, the Kuberts moved to Dover, New Jersey, where they raised their 5 children. David, the eldest, followed by Danny, Lisa, and comic book artists Adam and Andy Kubert. The Kubert granddaughter, Katie Kubert, works as a comics editor. She worked at DC Comics for 5 years as an editor on the Batman titles, and left to work on the X-Men titles at Marvel Comics in June 2014. Kubert's grandson and graduate of the Kubert School, Orion Zangara, is also a comics book artist who is currently working on a graphic novel trilogy for the Lehner Publishing Group. Granddaughter Emma Kubert is a comic book writer and artist. Kubert died of multiple myeloma on August 12, 2012, a month short of his 86th birthday. He was predeceased by his wife Muriel in 2008. Well, that's sad. But yeah, here's all the credits, site sources. So that's a nice, decently sized biography, because we either get biographies where it's like an index card, or biographies where it's like, this might as well just be a novel. So before we move on to the interviews, let's watch a few videos about his art. I found this one on his Tarzan artwork. This is Tarzan Joe Kubert, a master artist for the Art of Comics YouTube channel. Up, 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 up.
Hey everybody, konnichiwa, ohayou gozaimasu. It is me, Andres Salazar. You're watching the Art of Comics, and we are post Long Beach Comic Con. You can see the video, how I felt about it. Spoiler or just cliff notes. It was rinky-dink. Now, I did get a couple books though. So today we're going to talk about Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan. This is Tarzan of the Apes, DC Comics number 210. So this is Joe Kubert, which I don't really have.
Ah, damn it, it's Kubert, isn't it?
Any Joe Kubert, I think. So we're going to look through this and take a look at some Joe Kubert art and look at this issue. So I bought this for $1. It's definitely a reader copy, but I'm excited to take a look. So let's do it. Come on.
Are you ready?
Look at Tarzan by Joe Kubert. So I'm excited to share that. I don't know, again, like I said, don't know much Joe Kubert, but I was really looking forward to getting some. First, right off the bat, I really like the kind of little gestural elements here of the clothing in the hand. I like the kind of, looks like it's done kind of quick loose. I also really think these panel borders is really neat. I think he...
Kubert also really does well at making rugged looking characters. Like you see the Safari Man here, he looks pretty rugged, and he just seems to specialize in that.
Probably just reversed this. This was probably drawn normal, and then he did a reverso. But this is cool. I was like, okay, he's got a little bit of kind of abstract elements to it. This is kind of like, it says book 4 of Civilization, but this is the origin. This is like how, you know, Tarzan of Greystroke came about. And first off, really classic, like, beginning art stuff. Things in the foreground, more detailed, darker. Things in the background, lighter, sketchier, looser. So that's just like Art 101. Think about that, okay? Things in the foreground are more detailed, are darker. Things in the background are lighter. Sometimes that gets tricky when you look at mountains and landscapes, because you think, oh, the things far away, those mountains back there should be like dark purple and dark blue, but actually it's the reverse. They need to be light. They need to be lighter because through the atmosphere. It's called atmospheric perspective.
I never really thought of it that way, but maybe it's because I'm not an artist, so I would not be able to tell you. I wouldn't be able to tell you dick all about art.
Where things change tone by distance. Okay, little art class there. This is cool. I like jungle stuff. I like the mark making here. I think I like all this. I
like the half naked man.
Need to learn how to do this better. I just think it's fun. The panels are good. I like this little pop out here of the face, and then we get kind of a Warren magazine style narration head. I like that too. I think of it as that. Maybe it probably came from other places, but I think of that. And yeah, I like the looseness. It reminds me a little bit of Walt Simonson. I don't know if there's a connection there, if anybody else sees Walt Simonson in this, but I see a little bit of that.
Kinda. Yeah. Kinda. Well, Simonson is a little bit more majestic, I think. Or maybe I'm thinking of a different character. But yeah, his is a lot more like on the sci-fi fantasy side. His is less rugged and more clean cut compared to Kubert's. Or Kubert's. Crap. I'm just never gonna get that right.
I also really like when the panel borders aren't put in and you kind of just use the lines being the panel. I think that's fun. Yeah, I was really impressed with it. I see
Oh, look at Tarzan. He's so happy.
why it is important to study this guy and what kind of impact he made. This is a great page here, this panel. These long vertical panels to me are always a challenge. And putting these two figures just like that with some interesting stuff, and you got a lot of nice detail and line work in here. Really cool. Really neat. I would love to see what kind of like reference books you use for jungle and things like that. I like the silhouette again, changing up the type of angles and positions of the page.
I really like the coloring in this comic book too. It's not just greens, it's also purples and reds and oranges.
Just like say Wally Wood would talk about in the 22 panels that always work. Yeah, I thought it was fun. You know, it's old school. This is like 73 or 74. What was it? 72. So this is 72. So it's a while back. So the storytelling's a little older and the words and stuff, dialogue's a little older, but I think it totally holds up.
Okay, is it me or is the older style of writing... I do dig the older style of writing a lot more than the newer style of writing. I say this as a modern writer who definitely writes in the newer style of writing, but I don't know, it's just I like the older style a little bit better.
And nice little big head, side by side silhouette face here. These are kind of fun action moments. Yeah. I see a lot of European art too, reminds me of this kind of stuff. These kind of like the way the figures are. I can't think of the guys right off the top of my head, but I've seen some stuff that looks a little bit like Joe Kubert. Good elephants. Yeah. I thought this was really fun. I dug it. Let me see if anything else kind of calls out to me. I do like these silhouette again. Silhouettes are fun. I find them hard though for some reason.
Oh yeah, Tarzan at one point did go back to England, and then he got bored and went back to the jungle.
When to use them, how to do them. Yeah, there you go. That's it. Joe Kubert, look at the back. I like the back too. That's it. Thanks for watching, guys. I appreciate y'all for subscribing and liking the episode. And if you want to give me a solid, go check out the Patreon. You don't.
Yeah, I think that's a good looky-loo at Kubert's comic book art. We also have a few other images over here we can look at. Alright, so I believe this is Sergeant Rock right here. Just look at that detail. At the detail of the shadowing here and how he makes the helmet look like light is shining off of it. That's pretty neat. And he also did Punisher War Journal too. Again, he's really good at making rugged looking characters. He's really good at making characters look like they've been through hell, but they are still willing to break your bones if you piss them off. G.I. Joe. No, that is not what I wanted! Alright, I guess we can't look at that picture. Alright. Oh yeah, and his Hawkman. Yeah. That's a pretty good Hawkman. Okay. So, got a good look at his art. Where is... There were a couple other... Ah, here we go. This is God Loves Comics. Kubert draws either Man-Bat or Batman. So I figured we watch the man at his craft. gotta turn that down a little bit because I do not like the sound of the marker. Now! I'm just gonna watch. Yeah, that definitely looks more like Man-Bat than Batman. It amazes me just how quickly he can do this. I guess that goes for most artists. Maybe that's because my art skills are basically chicken scratch. I wonder how they know when to move on to the next part. Because I'm pretty sure that at this point he's just outlining to get the basic shape, and now he's going to add in like the detail. Alright, maybe the sound is more pleasant. Okay, yeah, that sounds much more pleasant. There we are. There's the classic Kubert line work. You guys ever watch an artist work and you see them do line work like that? It's like, I can do that easily. And then you try it yourself and it's like, oh crap, I can't do this. Oh my gosh, it's that trick that McFarlane was talking about in one of his videos where people were asking him how to draw feet and why so many artists were afraid of drawing feet. And he's like, oh, just put the feet in the background. Then it'll be like, you're allowed to get away with not putting in so much detail. And I was like, that is such an artist shortcut. I'm quite surprised that didn't come from Liefeld. Who are we kidding? Liefeld doesn't know how to draw feet. He wouldn't know how to that trick. My only guess on how he's able to know where to put the line is like years and decades of trial and error. That's the only way I can guess. I definitely couldn't be able to do that in 4 minutes. I think I had another one. Okay, so this is a video I found, which is kinda sort of related to the Kubrick School, I believe. Using the unique hatching style of Joe Kubert after reading his Eisner Award-winning graphic novel. I have no idea what this is going to be, so let's go ahead and watch that. This is by Retro Superhero Art.
Tried to draw in the style of the Kubert brothers Adam and Andy already, so today we go to the Big Daddy Joe Kubert, a legend in the comic book industry, partly due to the renowned school he founded with his wife, but also because he's a legendary artist. I collected in the 80s and 90s, so I hadn't really read any of his work yet, but in doing the research I saw he has an Eisner and a Harvey Award for Facts from Sarajevo, so that was the first thing I read, and wow.
Oh, it's Sarajevo. Man, I'm an idiot.
Heavy stuff, but I read it in one go. The awards are definitely deserved, and man is it a relevant story today. It's actually a true story and kind of an autobiographical one, because Joe is partly responsible for helping a man in Sarajevo escape the country, and he keeps mentioning a Dutch man called Martin. I was wondering, is this Martin Lodewijk? And yeah, it is. Martin Lodewijk is called the godfather of comics in the Netherlands. And knowing what he did for this man in Sarajevo makes me respect him even more. I feel kind of weird now doing my silly little style challenge after reading this powerful graphic novel. But yeah, passion for drawing and getting inspired is not something to be embarrassed about. So let's do it. Especially in the early Joe Kubert work, what I noticed is his long hatching. The strokes are very thin and long and quite...
Wait, that's what it's called? It's called hatching? Those, like, lines to indicate, like, depth and shadow, those are called hatching? Huh. Learn something new every day.
Spaced apart. And this one's cool, like in the Hawkman versus Superman story, he even breaks with the traditional page layouts. And this is 1981, so way before the Todd McFarlanes and Rob Liefelds were doing this. Trendsetter. I will definitely pick the James Dean pose since I picked that one for the Adam and Andy version. I want to use that long hatching on the shoulders, that's so typical, so maybe a tank-topped Cyclops on the motorcycle to join the other two guys.
Aw. Oh, he's applying the, he's applying, Kubrick's method to his own artwork. Well, that's cool. Well, I guess it goes to show that even though Kubert's artwork is considered outdated and is considered old school, you can still take something from his work. You can still take some lessons from his artwork and apply it to the modern day artwork. And this is actually kind of a cool video. I'm glad I found this. Trying to look at Hawkman's tits there. What does this style remind me of? Hold on, who is this guy drawing? Because his stuff looks so... Why does his style look so familiar? I feel like I've seen this guy's work before. I don't know where, but I've seen his work before. It looks very familiar.
Okay, color, play with some aging filters, and finito. I hope I did him justice. It's got the classic Silver Age face and the long hatching, so I'm pretty sure if I put these three in front of a comic fan, they would be able to pick out which one's Joe, Adam, or Andy. But maybe I should go to the
That's actually pretty interesting, just looking at the sons versus the father. Yeah.
Kubert School for a summer course in hands. What do you guys think? Drop a like if you think I succeeded, and catch you in the next challenge.
Well, that was interesting. That was so nice. Oh, yeah, there's a bit of a controversy that happened where a couple of authors got caught using AI prompts to write their books. Which, look, I know writing can be difficult, but at the very least, it's like, write your own damn stuff. I promise you, it's not that scary. Okay. So, we are going to read this Comics Journal interview. This was done, well, this was published August 14th, 2012. With Gary Groth. Alright. Age of 11. We already read through all that. Okay, so. When did this interview? Did I mention? Okay. I was looking forward to playing Joe and his son Andy. Okay, so I'm guessing this interview took place in 1994? Yep, 1994. Okay, so this interview took place in 1994, not 2012. It was just posted 2012. Alright, so. A Boy's Life, Groth. I'm going to want to dwell on the 40s because you're one of the few guys around that still has his marbles who can talk about that period of comics history. Kubert laughs coherently. Or cogently. Kubert, I'll accept that. Groth, I understand you attended the High School of Music and Art. Now, this was in Manhattan, and you lived in Brooklyn at the time. Brooklyn. Can you give me a general description of your upbringing? Was it middle class? Were your parents immigrants? They were immigrants, and I would classify my upbringing as being perhaps below middle class, but not lower class. Perhaps upper lower class? I don't really know what class my family would be considered. I think we were firmly middle class. Alright. Or lower middle class. Yeah, well, to really give a better explanation, both my parents worked. My mother ran a restaurant, and in the back of the restaurant were 3 rooms in which I and my 4 sisters lived with my mother and father. My father was a kosher butcher. He went to work in his store, which was maybe 5 or 6 blocks from home. That was in East New York in Brooklyn, where I grew up. Where were your parents from? Both my parents were from Poland, and I was born in Poland. My mother was pregnant with me the first time they made the attempt to come to the United States back in 1926, and because she was pregnant, they would not permit her to go on the ship until she gave birth. So they returned to their home in Poland. I was 2 months old when they went back to the ship in Southampton, England, and finally came to America. So I was about 2 months old when I got to the United States. I think he would be the first actual, or technically he's the first, actual immigrant on this list, or that we've covered, I believe. I say technical because he was a baby, but he was still an immigrant, and everyone else was at least born in the United States. I believe. Unless I'm forgetting someone. I probably am. Because I'm a bit of a dummy. Alright. Setting something on fire here. Alright, Groth, what was your childhood like? I can remember from my earliest years a love for drawing. I was really blessed and fortunate in that I could pursue that which I love to do. I've been drawing since I was 3 years old, since I can remember. I recall that when I was a kid of 3 or 4, I used to be given boxes of chalk by the neighborhood people, penny boxes of chalk, so I can draw in the gutters. They enjoyed seeing me draw. My parents came from the type of background where you didn't do something that would eventually result in getting a job. They would not permit you to idle away your time in that manner. That's the way most people thought at that time, especially immigrants. But like I said, I was lucky. My parents saw how much I loved drawing, and they encouraged me in every possible way, never deterred me. They did everything to help me. I was very, very lucky. This goes back to what I've said before, how a lot of people think that conservatives just hate the arts. And it's like, no, it's not that they hate the arts. It's just they want their children to pursue something that's going to make them money so they could be successful. And it seems like Kubert's parents were very much of that line of thought. It's like, hey, if you can make money while doing it, so be it. But if you're not going to be able to make money for it in the future, and you're not going to be able to, pay your way, then why are you idling away on something so useless? So it seems like his parents come from that school of thought. What were your formative influences when you were a kid? You must have gone to the movies. Yeah, movies cost 10 cents for admission. Oh god, the days when movies were 10 cents for admission. I think the old fogies would absolutely choke if they saw the movie ticket prices nowadays. What is it now, like $15, $18 for just the tickets, and that's not even talking about the concession stands? I remember seeing the original Public Enemy. I think it was with Paul Mooney and James Canny, right. Scarface was with Paul Mooney. I remember as a kid coming home from having seen Frankenstein on the big screen and looking in all the alleys. I was sure this monster was going to come out as I ran home. So I guess my formative years were influenced by those movies. But newspapers, where the comic strips were really my world. For me and most of the guys who came into the business at the time, I think Hal Foster fostered, no pun intended, yeah, more cartoonists than he ever dreamed possible. There was a newspaper in the New York Journal-American that carried Prince Valiant, and Tarzan was still being published in the New York Daily Mirror. The Journal-American was a big tabloid-sized newspaper, and every Sunday when the color comic strips came out, I'd lay on the floor and just kind of wrap them around me, around my mind. That was the world I lived in. Guys like Foster and Alex Raymond and Milton Caniff, as I said many times before, have inadvertently fathered an incredible number of cartoonists. Now, this would have been around 34, 35. No, maybe 1930, 31, 32. I was born in 26, and in 37 or 38, I got my first job. I was around 12 and a half years old, or 11 and a half years old. I can't read. This was when comic books were just starting to come into being, just starting to hit the mom and pop candy stores, where they were sold next to Callers and the Sunday Evening Post. I got started in comic books in the following way. Gary, a young fellow by the name of Melvin Butoff, and I don't know what the hell ever happened to Melvin, who was a student in grammar school in my class just previous to junior high school. His uncle, who I think was Louis Skilbullet, was one of the founders and owners of what is now the Archie Group, which was at the time MLJ. I was always drawing muscle guys. One day Melvin said, "Joe, why don't you take your drawings and bring them up and I show them to my uncle? He publishes comic books." Child labor! Hooray! I thought, why not? So I guess I was about 11. I started down for Manhattan. They had an office on Canal Street in Manhattan, and I wrapped my drawings in newspapers. For years, old newspapers were my only portfolio in which I carried my drawings. The first time I went up to MLJ, guys like Mort Meskin and Charlie Brio and Harry Shorten, people like that, were sitting and drawing. Names, I guess, a lot of the young guys today never heard of. And all and these were all obviously your elders. Yes, they were very kind to me and extended themselves in every way to help me. I just can't get over the fact that he was so young. This snotty kid comes up asking a bunch of ridiculous questions. Subways were only a nickel, and it took me maybe half an hour, 3/4 of an hour, to get up there from where I lived in Brooklyn, in East New York. They allowed me to come into what we call today the bullpen, where the artists were working. These guys, a half dozen or so artists, would let me look over their shoulders while they were working, kind of giving me clues into how it's all done. Bob Montana, the man who created Archie, was up there at the time. He was very helpful to me. I inked Archie over Bob Montana's pencils when it first came out as a comic book. He gave me the opportunity to do it. Irv Novick was there. He gave me my first lesson in how to draw a German helmet. I wonder how all of those older guys felt that this young little kid, not even a teenager yet, shows up and it just automatically starts drawing and inking. Like, that's gotta make you feel kind of crummy a little bit, doesn't it? Did you actually get to talk to Joe Kubert? Did you get to see him? No. I got to see the editor, whose name I forget now, but Harry Shorten was a writer, only a writer. Harry later became editor-in-chief. Is this what would have been called a shop at the time? No, it was a publication house. A shop is more appropriate description of the place run by Harry A. Chesler. Harry had a shop with about 10 or 12 artists and writers, and he would package different kinds of comic books for a variety of publishers. In those days, you could be a publisher in an office the size of a closet. Put your name on the door, and you're a publisher. I don't know if you would be able to get away with that nowadays, but okay. You don't have to hire any artists. You don't have to hire any writers. You go to Harry A. Chesler. Harry puts a whole book together for you. What do you need? A mystery comic book? You want a humor book? He'd not only produce the editorial and creative work, but he'd create a package including the coloring, separations, and plates. Everything just short of doing the printing and distributing. Harry was a great guy. No more like him around anymore. Alright, hot dog money. That's a look at Tor. Alright. Let me just get back to MLJ when you were 11 or 12. Rein me in because I'm already off on a tangent. You just hung around the offices. Now, how long did that last? I didn't actually hang around, but I'd go up as often as I could. They were all helpful to me and continually gave me bits of information. One artist would suggest, watch this figure, kid. Start doing this. Learn how to draw that. And then I asked, can I come back again and show you when I do what you've told me? Sure, kid. Come back anytime. Oh, that's so nice of them. That was so cute. So maybe once a week or as often as I could, I'd come back, sometimes at the cost of my attendance in school. That's the way I got my first jobs. I'd be there when the work was going out, and every once in a while the editor would say, think you could do this, kid? And that's how I got the opportunity to ink Bob Montana's Archie strip. Just like that. You were 12 years old? 12 years old, yeah, or thereabout. That's amazing. It was amazing, but I didn't realize that then. It just happened. That would absolutely not happen at all nowadays. Not just because of the child labor element, although that is a very big factor in that, but just a company being willing to take a chance on just some kid that showed up on your doorstep and is like, can I draw for you? Alright. How did they pay you, or was this more of an unpaid apprenticeship arrangement? I don't remember getting paid for that work. I may have, but I don't remember. It didn't make the slightest difference to me whether they paid me or not. I understand that the first work you actually did was for Harry A. Chesler in 40 or 41, where you worked 1.5 day 1.5 hours a day after school for $5 a week. Yes and no. The $5 a week he gave me was really like a present. I never asked for money. He gave it to me on his own. What he said was, "Hey kid, get yourself a hot dog." The Depression wasn't that far behind us, and things were still very, very tough. He would say, "Here, take this $5 and buy yourself a hot dog." The $5 was a lot of money at the time. Roth, how did you find Harry Chesler? I had started high school at the High School of Music and Art in Manhattan. Schools in all 5 boroughs were permitted to send students to music and art based on passing a test in art or music. When you were permitted to attend the school, which happened to be an hour and a half from my home in Brooklyn. So I traveled 3 hours a day on the subway for a nickel ride back and forth to attend the school. While at Music and Art, I met my buddy Norman Maurer. I met him in my first year at the school. Norman and I hit it off because we both loved cartooning. People with common interests, especially cartoonists, had a tendency to gravitate together. I guess that would explain a few things. And what we do is we'd attend school 2 days a week and use the other 3 days to take our work all around to all the different publishers. Sometimes we would walk all the way from 135th Street to where the school was, down to 23rd Street where Chesler was, trying to hit every publishing company in between to show them our work. How the hell we ever made it through high school is still a mystery to me, just by the skin of our teeth, I guess. So it was on one of those expeditions that you met Chesler. Yeah, either through the indica inside of the books or a referral. Somebody in some publishing house who suggested, "Hey kid, go down and see this guy." That's the way it worked. Yeah, just bug all of the publishers in your area until somebody gives you a job. And I there's this common saying where, I forget how it goes. It's not really so much of whoever's the best who succeeds, it's whoever's the one who hangs on the most that succeeds. I'm not saying that Kubert wasn't the best. I'm just saying that because he was so persistent and kept holding on to his dream, that was a major part in how he was able to get the opportunities that he did. And unfortunately, when it comes to a lot of creative fields, that's just kind of how it works. Now, have we gotten to the point where there are some people who are amazing at what they do and they get work? Yes, that certainly happens, but a lot of it is that they just did not give up. And because they didn't give up, they got the work. Them's show business. All right, I don't want to go too much further because this looks like it's going to be a very long article. So I'm just going to leave the link for this interview down below, and we're going to move on to a different interview. Not that one, not that one. What's this? That's all the last one. This one. This is the comicarchives.com, and this is an interview with Kubert sitting down to talk about his long career and his tools for the trade. So let's get started.
Okay, my name is Joe Kubert, and I'm a cartoonist. I started when I was about 12 years old. I got my first job. I was lucky enough to do that, and I've been working ever since. I'm here in the office. I have a studio here in my home, which is about 5 or 10 minutes from here. I have a studio there. Most of my work is done here because of my responsibilities at the school. And the schedule I keep is one where I'm here by 8 o'clock, 8:30 in the morning. I leave at 5:30. I'm at this table all that time. And Saturday and Sunday I come in for the mornings up from about 8:30 till 12, 1 o'clock on Saturday and Sunday. I take a half a day off on Saturday and Sunday.
Now that is a man who loves his job.
I always wanted to do this work. I'm one of the most fortunate ones, I think. And that is, I was able to work it out so that I'm doing that which I love to do, always have loved to do, always look forward to doing. And so it's never been work for me. I think I retired the first job I took because I would be drawing, whether I was hired to do this work or not. I would be drawing, I think. Perhaps not as much, but I would be drawing. Well, it's a tremendous thrill showing it to my parents at that time. I was just getting into high school and being able to work at the same time of going to school, and this was kind of just a little bit after the Depression, I guess. The Depression was still on. I was bringing home money, which was an incredible thing, doing what I love to do, and they're paying me for it.
That is the dream, being able to do what you want to do and get money.
My father was a kosher butcher, and it was hard making a living. My bringing in some money was a big help. I've always, however, been encouraged by my folks, but I'd always loved to do this kind of work. It started with a love affair I've had with the newspaper strips. Terry and the Pirates, Flash Gordon, Tarzan. These were the things that I lived for.
I'm thinking about putting Terry and the Pirates, and Flash Gordon for the next character showcase. Maybe Tarzan, because it's like they clearly have influenced so many different artists and writers, where it's like, you know what, maybe we should cover them and look into them and see how they've evolved as characters.
Weekends I could wrap the papers around me. They were large sized newspaper, and I was in another world. And this is the kind of work I always have wanted to do, and I was lucky enough to be able to do it. I guess at that age you're so naive, and you don't really know all the things you don't know. And so you figured, just go ahead and do it, which is what I did. And I was lucky because I was able to learn on the job, which is something that doesn't exist today.
No, it does not. Which is a shame, because what he basically did was become an internship. And I've been hearing so much from artists on YouTube and on Twitter saying that art school is kind of a waste of time, and you're honestly better off becoming an apprentice to a working artist already. And it's like, yeah, that would be preferable, because not only do you get to do your art and you get to improve on your art, but you also get to learn the tricks of the trade, and you get to learn how to apply your art to whatever form of entertainment you choose to do. And that's something that you don't really get in a classroom. I went to school for psychology, so it's slightly different, but one thing that they never really told me about in school, and I didn't find out until after I got out of school, that the people who did internships and actually worked under practicing counselors or practicing psychologists or psychiatrists even, those were the people who would continue on with their career and the ones who were more likely to get actual job work after college, which is something that nobody ever really told me. I was just told to go to school, get the good grades, and everything will work out for you. And I think that's what a lot of artists nowadays are being told. They're being told, yeah, just do your art, do your blog, do whatever, go to art school, and then you will automatically be able to get whatever job you want, lickety split. It's like, that's not how it worked. It didn't even really work that way back then. It's like what Kubert did. He just hustled. He hustled his way into getting the work that he did. And not a lot of kids are being taught that nowadays, which is kind of sad, but it does make me wonder, why has that phased out? Why has that tradition of you become an apprentice to one, maybe even multiple different artists to learn the trade, when did that phase out? Because that sounds like it would be the most phenomenal resource to work under a great artist. Like, holy hell, there are artists who would have slit their wrists to have worked under the folks like Jack Kirby or Steve Ditko or even Mobius. There are artists who would slit their wrists for that opportunity. And just for some reason it's not common anymore, and I don't know why, because it just makes sense. I would have loved to have a mentor for writing. That would be absolutely amazing because I'm still very self-conscious and insecure about my skill as a writer. But anyway, rant over.
Nobody could break into the business or get a job unless they really know what they're doing to begin with. At least having a certain level of competence to begin with. The stuff that I did was awful. At the age of 12, it was terrible. But then comic books were 10 cents a copy. There were 64 pages of magazine stuff, interior material, and so they could stick in a 5-pager that was terrible because they had 60 other pages to compensate for it. But it gave me an opportunity to learn on the job. So seeing, as you asked, seeing the first job printed, no matter how awful it looked, was the biggest thrill in the world to me, and still is a thrill. Every time I see my stuff in print, it's a big, big kick. Always. First drawing.
I mean, even if your shit is shit, it's still nice to know that at least one publisher thought, well, it's just good enough to be in our paper.
Things I did when I tried to find out what this was all about were just done with pencil. I knew nothing about the materials that were being used. Like most people, like myself, who were interested in the work, but had no idea of the intricacies of production, of reproduction, of print material, and so on. I assumed that you draw on a piece of paper with a pencil and you color it with color pencils, and that's the way it comes out in a comic book. I was again very, very lucky. Before I got my first job, I went up to MLJ, who was a forerunner of Archie Comics. I had been going to a school, just starting off. I was in junior high school, just starting off in high school. And a friend of mine who happened to be related to some of the bigwigs up at MLJ suggested that I go up there because they knew I drew. I've been drawing since I was 2 years old. And they said, gee whiz, this guy said, Joe, your stuff looks really good. Why don't you take him up and show him to my uncle or whoever the hell it was, and maybe you can get a job and they'll pay you for it. I said, gee, that sounds good. I was living in East New York and Brooklyn at the time. MLJ was on Canal Street in Manhattan. I got on the subway, which was 5 cents at the time. So you can imagine how long ago that was.
Again, 5 cents for a bus ride. Imagine that.
And I took the subway train. I think I was about 11 and a half, 12 years old. I put the sketches that I did in a paper bag from my father's store and went up there and showed it to them, not knowing what materials were being used, not knowing what happened to the work when the artist finished it. But the guys up at MLJ were so kind and so nice. They showed me the work they were doing. First time I had ever seen an original. First time I learned that the original drawings were much larger than the printed material. It was done with ink. I never knew that. They used brushes. They used pen. Never knew that. You erase the pencils. Never knew that. The lettering is done with a certain. So little by little, I was able to learn all these things based on the fact that the guys up there, people like, Charlie Byra was up there, Mort Meskin was up there, a whole bunch of guys that you probably never even heard of, but nevertheless, these were the people that were very kind. Not only did they show me the kind of work that was done with those particular tools, but they gave me some paper. They gave me the boards. They gave me a brush. They gave me the pencils to work with and said, hey kid, if you're really interested in it, do some stuff and come on up again, which is what I did.
Child labor for the win!
I think like most of us, you're always looking, that's part of the charm, the part of the pleasure of doing the work we do. You're never really quite satisfied. You're always looking to push it a little further, to do something that you've not been done before, to create an impression or put across an idea that kind of nudges in the back of your head, but you're not quite sure what it is. And I'm pretty satisfied with the work once I finished it. 5 minutes later, I can see a half a dozen places where I could have done it better.
So for I'm trying to relay my own experience as a writer to an artist, which I know are two very different worlds. But when I had to stop writing for a little while during college because I had to focus on my studies, and I got super depressed about that. But then after college, and I was still depressed, I was starting to write again to get back into my mojo, and the first free verse poem that I completed, I was at first proud of myself, and then I read it again, and it's like, wow, I immediately hate it. Why is this so shitty? And I'm very rarely completely satisfied with anything I produce. Even with the Next Evolution, even with my blog, I'm rarely ever 100% satisfied with something that I've written. I'm always thinking, how can I improve this? How can I make this flow better? And I think it's because that drive that Kubert mentioned, that you're never going to be fully satisfied. That's how you grow as an artist, as a writer. That's just how you grow. Because if you think that you're perfectly good 100% of the time, you're never going to see the flaws in your own work. And then you are never going to improve. What was that? Tom Preston. He was also known as Andrew Dobson. He was notorious for being super sensitive to criticism. He didn't want to hear any sort of suggestion, even a suggestion on how to improve his artwork. He would throw a fit. He would make a comic about how you were just a stupid dum-dum that knew nothing about art. And he was also notorious for blocking people, too. And as a result, his art style did not progress at all. He just stayed in the same level that he was. And it's kind of sad when you see someone who does have some talent to them, but they just refuse to grow. And a lot of that comes from, you have to have that drive in you where you always want to improve, and you always are looking at your work being like, how can I improve this? Or, wow, I really should have done this instead of that. So, yeah.
And so rather than tie myself up on one piece of work that I'm going to do forever, I figure what I've learned on this one, I'm going to apply to the next one. That's what I've tried to do. I just scurried around. After I got the first job, I realized that in order to keep busy, since this was a completely freelance kind of a thing, I wasn't committed to anybody. There's no such thing as a contract or anything. I knew that the only way that I could get some steady money coming in was to work at least for 2 or 3 places and set myself up with a schedule where, knowing what the deadline was, giving myself enough time to do the job, that's the way I kicked into it. But thinking about having enough, being situated where that I felt secure, never entered my mind. At home, most of my work until, well, we're talking about now 1939, 1938, which was a couple of years ago. Later on in the 70s, I worked as an editor for about 20 years up at D.C. I edited a whole batch of books. And even there, I had the freedom to name the days that I'd be coming in. I didn't come in every day. I named the time because I was living here in New Jersey. Offices were, of course, in New York. And I'd be able to work it out so that I went into the city after the rush hour was over and came back before the rush hour started, 3 days a week. And that was my schedule. So that's the way I worked it out then. But other than that, I've always worked at home, always.
Well, it probably helped that by the time that point of his career, he was, you know, he could get away with shit like that. Like, you could not get away with something like that as a newbie. You have to work your way up the ladder to be able to work something out like that.
And it was extremely fortunate for me. I have 5 kids, and being able to be at home, I gave my wife a hand, of course, with the kids. I'm there all the time. I think it was extremely advantageous, that kind of a situation, for me, for my wife, and for the kids. Usually it was at the very last minute, making those deadlines is still a tough thing. And I would, I would drive it in because you couldn't really depend on the mail. There was no such thing as FedEx or sending it over the internet, which,
I was wondering with that with a couple of the other episodes where it's like, how did those guys not get worried that their stuff would get lost in the mail? How did they not get worried about that? Because I would be worried shitless that something would happen. Well, I mean, even when I was shipping out my own comic book, I was just biting my nails, terrified that they would never get to the people I was sending them to. And they did, but it's like, I would not be comfortable at all shipping original artwork like that.
no, none of the originals leave your hands anymore. You just send them over the internet. But yeah, I had, in order to make the deadlines, there was many a trip that I made without sleeping the night before in order to be able to make it in the city the next day. Yeah. Well, the system was, with me and most of the guys who were working at the time, first of all, it has to be understood that the artists, most of the artists, I would say at least 99% of them, didn't do their own stories. The stories were written by a whole staff of writers. You would get a script, very similar to a movie shooting script, and you would illustrate the stories, whatever story came through. You would do the story, bring it in, and hopefully the editor would have the next story for you. And as I said before, the only assurance, the only insurance that a freelance artist has is the job that he's working on, the job that's sitting on the board to be done, the next one, and the one that's in the mail coming in. That's the only kind of insurance that any freelance artist has. I was lucky enough, like I said before, never to have been unemployed from the first day I started, even when I was in the Army. But the procedure that would be followed would be, when I started out, that you would get the script from the editor, approved by the editor. You would then bring in pencils. You would pencil the entire story on the original size, so that if there are any corrections at that stage of the job, they could be done, they could be made without too much problem, because once the ink is done, then you got it. If you had corrections then, you have to either cut or paste over and so on and so forth. It's a hell of a lot easier to make the corrections in pencil form than it is later on. So you bring the pencils into the editor. Whatever editorial corrections have to be made are made at that time. Fortunately, there were very few, because deadlines sat on the editor's back just as heavily as they sat on the freelancers. I would bring it in at that stage and have it lettered. The lettering is done before the inking, so that when you're inking the page, as you know, your inking would come right up to the balloon, and you're never sure how much space. I mean, you always allow room for the text when you're penciling the story, but the precise amount of space is not determined until the letterer does his job. After it's lettered, he also does the borders.
I always thought that the lettering came last. Maybe that's a more modern thing. I don't know.
The letterer at that time did the borders as well. It would then be returned to me and I would ink it. I would take it home and I would ink it, and then I'd bring back the completed job. That was the procedure that was followed. Most of the freelance artists worked at home. Some of the guys would come into the city if the publisher or the editor could afford some working space. They would work up there. Some guys prefer to work out of the house. However, most of the people I knew did work at home, and the only time you'd get together socializing was minimum. Of course, the only time you'd see the guys that were doing work at the same time would be if they happened to be in at the same time delivering a job or bringing in their pencils or whatever. So there wasn't that much of a community of people meeting each other. Anyhow, not the freelancers. Yeah, and
I've noticed that it's a lot of the more professional artists, they just don't have the time to get wrapped up in socializing or get wrapped up in bullshit drama, which is a far cry from some of the a couple of the indie artists that you see on Twitter nowadays.
always admired. Well, guys like Hal Foster and Milt Caniff and Alex Raymond probably bred more guys into this business than they ever dreamed of. They had more acolytes than they ever realized. Most of the guys that came into the business at my time, and even today, admired those three guys. And then there were people in the business itself like a Lou Fine, you might not have heard of, Reed Crandall, outstanding artist, beautiful stuff that they did. In fact, a lot of the freelancers would run to the candy store where they sold the comic books at that time and buy that particular work. They'd be waiting for that stuff every month to come out because they had...
Can you imagine those candy store workers? Because this was at the time when comic books were very much only considered to be kids stuff. Can you imagine just being the candy store owner opening up your store and you see a line of grown-ass dudes who are ready to get this one comic book and just being like, it's the comic book artists again.
Admired it so much. Well, it's the stuff I got, as I mentioned before, the first stuff I got was from MLJ itself. The artists up there were kind enough to give me stuff. After that, I'd go to the art stores that they had suggested, and the tools I used were comparatively commonplace. I find generally that they were a heck of a lot, quality-wise, a heck of a lot better years ago than they are today.
Oof. That's something I just hear across the board, that the tools of yesteryear were a hell of a lot better than the ones today. And, heart goes out to you, artists.
The brush, we use a brush, the English brush, Winsor Newton, used to be the standard. But my own feeling about it is that the quality has kind of not so much deteriorated, but become pretty haphazard. You got to be careful to pick up the right brush as far as the Winsor Newton is concerned. I today use a brush that I get from France called a Raphael. In fact, it's supplied in the kit, in the art kit of every student who comes to the school here. Pencils, I would use a 3H pencil, a little harder than a 2H or a 2B is way too soft.
What the fuck was that?
Reason is, the 3H, the reason I use the 3H for penciling, and I still do today, is because the pencils, of course, have to be erased after you ink it. If you're using a softer pencil, the graphite is too oily, and what happens when you ink on top of that, the ink has a tendency to sit on the surface of that graphite, and when you erase it, the ink comes up as well, grays out the inking. Ink, I use pens, I still use the dip pens. I do a lot of coloring now on the computer. A lot of times I prefer using the watercolors. I've done blue line color. It's called blue line.
Painting for color line art is transferred to a clear film. Blue on an artboard can be beneath the clean. Okay. I'm remaining quiet in this segment because I have zero clue what he's talking about with the art supplies, but maybe some of the artists in the audience would appreciate his discussion of this.
color, which most of the guys today have no idea what the hell I'm talking about. But I do, I've colored in that way to do my own stuff. And the reason for it is that I feel that an artist should attempt to do every part of the job, the artwork that he's doing, in order to retain the uniqueness of his work. The moment you have a bunch of people, I feel, a bunch of people working on the job, which is most of the way it's done today. There are guys who'll do layout work before even finished pencils, and there'll be somebody who'll do the finished pencils. Then there's somebody who'll be inking backgrounds or penciling backgrounds and inking backgrounds and doing only the figures. And you know, each person that comes in to accompany that job, not that it makes the job lesser in quality, it just loses its uniqueness.
Too many cooks. It sounds like one of those issues of too many cooks. And I have noticed that a lot of books nowadays, they have like multiple different hands on the artwork. I'm not going to comment on how that affects the artwork, but it's like, why do you need so many people on this book? Like, why do you need an entire football team to make one single floppy comic book? Not even a graphic novel. A graphic novel I could probably understand a little bit more, but just a single floppy? Like, how many people do you need for that? Especially when, back in the old days, it took 3, maybe 4 people if someone else was doing the coloring outside of the inker and the penciler and the letterer. But it's like, how many people do you need?
And after a while, all the stuff looks the same, and it's happening now with the color. I think the color that's used, the computer coloring that's used today, is so incredibly overpowering that despite the fact that the original work might have some differences, once you put that heavy color on top of it, all the stuff looks alike. It loses its individuality. But coming back to the stuff I use, and I still do that today. I use the brushes. I use a number of different kinds of brushes depending on the kind of line I'm looking for. I use dry brush a lot of time if I want a certain texture I'm looking for. I use a variety of pens depending on the line that I'm looking for. I can do all of this if I would just by using the brush. But it becomes a little bit more difficult, and it's a little bit more tedious to use the same tool for each one of the textures that I'm trying to achieve. So I find it a heck of a lot more convenient and time-wise a lot more advantageous to have maybe 3 or 4 different pens that I use: a finer pen, a rougher pen, a pen that's more flexible, less flexible, different kind of brushes if I want a really fine line on a brush, or if I'm looking for a blunt line from the brush. Those are the tools I use. The pages when I started were 13 by 18 as opposed to the 10 by 15 size today. So reproduction was half, came down 50% from the original. You had to know or have a sense of what would print and what would not, because if you used a bunch of fine lines, they would either break or come together and muddy up. So that you had to make sure that the strokes that you put down with the ink and with the brush and pen were clear enough and heavy enough to be able to reproduce under those circumstances.
That does explain why a lot of the older work, a lot of the lining is a lot more bolder and solid. I mean, nowadays you can get away with finer lining, but that does explain why it was heavier back then.
That doesn't exist today. Today it's scanned in on the computer, and that machine picks up every fine line, as you know. You can put it down to the size of a postage stamp and they'll still have almost every line you put down. I would put down a bolder stroke on the drawings I was doing. I would purposely coarsen the work I was doing in order to compensate for what occurred to it when in reduction and reproduction, and the kind of plates that were used at that time. Coloring was incredible because you had 4 colors, which included black, and then if you had really good printing at the time, they would say, for instance, the yellow would have 3 grades of yellow, blue would have 3 grades of blue, and those created the alternate colors like green or purple or violet, whatever the 3 primaries, red, yellow, and blue, whatever those primaries were. The registry was a very interesting kind of thing because each plate had to be made for each color that was used, and those plates were printed one on top of another to create the colors and the printed page. If the colors came within 1/8 of an inch of each other, you considered it a clean job. Today you're getting stuff that looks like the National Geographic. I mean, it's no one in my business 15 years ago, 20 years ago, ever dreamed that the quality of comic books that you have today would ever exist. They were in New York, they're downtown New York, and I was also lucky enough to be a friend of people like Jack Adler, who was in charge of production up at DC, Saul Harrison, who was in charge, a lot of the guys. I always was interested to learn what happened to my work once it left my hands, because nobody sees your original work except the editor. What everybody judges your stuff on is what it looks like when it comes out in the book. Saul Harrison at one time was president and publisher of DC Comic Books, having risen from doing color separations for the engraving. Jack Adler.
It's so crazy that they would come up from like the lower positions like that. I don't know. Maybe I'm just so used to people either getting their positions in the higher up editing or being in charge of everything through nepotism, or because they have some sort of like degree or whatnot.
Became head of production for DC Comics. Those are the guys I learned from. Reproduction now, scanning into a computer, you can get any kind of technique, any kind of an effect you're looking for. Anything you can imagine, you can work out and get that kind of an effect through the computer. When I started off doing the Yussel book, I had a particular effect in mind. When I started out, my intent was to ink the whole job after I penciled it. But when I did the first couple of pages, I realized that in the sketching of the story, the drawings had an immediacy that I wanted to incorporate in the entire job. I wanted the reader.
I'm gonna take a little pause here. I'm not adding much commentary because he's more talking about the individual like techniques of the publishing and art, which I can't really comment on at all. But I'm taking a pause just in case YouTube decides to be a dong again and try to, I don't know, flag my shit. They still have not told me exactly what I did in that Mobius stream that got their panties in a twist, so I'm not gonna risk it. We're gonna take a quick little pause. I'm gonna light something else on fire here, because I'm just about running out. I got the black cherry incense now. I like the rain one the most because it smells like a campfire.
To feel that this kid Yussel, who was sketching through this whole book, the young artist, this Jewish kid who was in the ghetto, was doing these drawings right on the spot. And the person who was holding the book in their hand, reading it, was looking over his shoulder. Now, to do it as a complete, finished penciling and inking job would have defeated that purpose. Having it in pencil only, I felt, contained the element of immediacy, as if the kid who was drawing that which he saw at that moment. And so a lot of the extraneous things, a lot of the detail in the background would have been left out because his focus was on that important factor, those important elements in that particular drawing he was doing. That's the kind of interest I try to maintain throughout that book.
That's actually an interesting stylistic choice for something like that, yeah. I love how when artists do something that's not considered traditional, or they do something where it's like, why the heck are you doing that? And it's like, oh, that's because I have a certain vision of how this is going to look. It's like, all right.
You can do that now. You can do that a hell of a lot more easily than 30 or 40 years ago because they had pretty heavy limitations, what would print and what wouldn't print. And I tried a whole bunch of different stuff. I'd leave panels off, I'd put some pencil sketches in, just to sneak it in to see how they'd reproduce, just to see what would happen to it when it was printed. So I was kind of testing things as I was going along. I'd use a little bit of dry brush, I'd use a little bit of zip-it on it. Anything that would make it a little bit different, anything that would create a truer impression of what I had in mind. I remember when I started out, it might be an interesting aside. This was at a time, like in the 50s and 60s, when magazines like Codgers and Saturday Evening Post, who had some of the most incredible artists in the world illustrating stuff there, the magazines were going out of business. And so a lot of the artists scrounging for work would come to the comic book publishers and get some work. A lot of the
I mean, hey, if it works, it works.
guys who were doing work for comic books were ashamed of the fact that they were working for comic books. They'd never tell anybody that they were doing it's junk stuff. It's junk for kids. I never felt that way, and I was a kid at the time, so it didn't mean anything to me. But the older artists, many of them were ashamed. If you asked them what they were doing, they'd say, well, I'm doing advertising work. They would never say they were doing comic strips for the comic books.
It could be worse. You could be drawing porno books.
I never felt that way. I've always felt that this is something that I'd love to do, and I still feel that way today. Wonderful. More so than I ever did before. I think I'm getting a handle on it now.
Finally, you're getting the hang of it.
Well, that was nice. I liked that interview. He covers a wide range of different things. What's this video? Michael Moorcock. Mini Ace. But yeah, I think that was a very nice interview, and I think that's a nice note to end this stream on, how he never once regretted comic book career, never once saw it as something he didn't want to do. He always just loved comic books, and you just love seeing someone just happy to be doing what he wants to do and happy that he's in the industry that he's in. It's always nice to see. But with that being said, I believe now is a good time to stop streaming. If you liked tonight's stream, please give me a like. Subscribe if you want to, share the video, and I will see you all the next one. Bye!